While I was deployed, my uncle sent a video of himself assaulting my son for ISIS. What happens when a soldier isn't home to shield his child? My boy begged, "Please stop. My dad will deal with you." He scoffed, "That weakling? I'm not afraid." Then my wife said, "He's just a mechanic who wipes down army tires." They had no clue I was Special Forces' most feared interrogator. Can you imagine receiving a video that utterly shatters your world, revealing the darkest betrayal from the people you loved and trusted most? My own uncle, my own wife, torturing my 6-year-old son, then openly mocking me as a weakling. What the hell would you do next? My name is Jake. For years, I moved through the compounds of Afghanistan like a ghost. At 34, I was one of the Army's most feared interrogators, a man they called the Shadow. I could break hardened enemy combatants without leaving a single mark, extracting information with nothing but psychological warfare, an intimate understanding of fear. My methods weren't in any handbook. I was a master of manipulation, capable of destroying a mind while leaving the body perfectly intact. One sweltering afternoon, my phone buzzed. A video message from Marissa, my wife. 8 years married, she was supposed to be looking after our 6-year-old, Wesley, back home while I was on my 3rd deployment. I met her at a dive bar near Fort Bragg, a beautiful blonde with those sad eyes and daddy issues I foolishly thought I could fix. I opened the video, expecting to see Wesley's gap-toothed smile, or maybe Marissa complaining about a leaky faucet. Instead, my blood ran colder than the Afghan night. The camera, positioned right there in our living room, showed my Uncle Herman, my father's younger brother, striking Wesley across the face. My son stumbled back, tears already streaming. Herman's voice, chillingly calm, filled the air. This is what happens when soldiers aren't home to protect their kids. Wesley, sobbing, looked straight into the camera, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Please stop, Uncle Herman. My dad will come for you when he gets home." Then, Herman let out a laugh that would haunt my darkest nightmares. "That weakling? I'm not scared of your daddy, boy. Jake's just a paper pusher who probably cleans boots for real soldiers." But the true gut punch, the moment my entire world imploded, came with Marissa's voice from behind the camera. "He's just a mechanic," she said, her tone dismissive, condescending. "He only cleans military tires. Herman, he's not scary like you." The video cut out. Herman, roughly grabbing Wesley by the arm, dragged him off camera, my son's screams echoing in the silence. I stared at that black screen for what felt like an eternity. My wife. The woman I'd married, provided for, protected, she wasn't just allowing another man to abuse our son. She was actively participating, even humiliating me in the process. They thought I was just some mechanic, some grease monkey. They had no idea they were talking about Jake Walker, the Special Forces interrogator, the man who'd broken war criminals, who specialized in psychological warfare, who could destroy lives with surgical precision. 20 minutes later, my commanding officer, Colonel Blake Turner, found me still staring at my phone. "Walker," he said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Colonel," I replied, my voice flat, "I need emergency leave. Family crisis." Blake studied my face. I knew what he saw. A predator, honed and ready. "How long?" he asked. "However long it takes," I told him, "to handle some unfinished business." My flight landed at Fort Bragg just 18 hours later. 18 hours of nothing but research, planning, and cold, calculated preparation. My military training had pounded one truth into me. Intelligence gathering is the foundation of any successful operation. Herman Newman, 42. He lived in a crumbling apartment complex, maybe 15 minutes from my own house. Freelance contractor, mostly cash-under-the-table construction. But here's the kicker, the crucial detail. Herman had a nasty gambling problem. He owed money to some truly dangerous people. My first stop wasn't home. It was Herman's building. I needed to understand the battlefield before I engaged the enemy. The Sunset Manor apartments were exactly what I expected. Cracked asphalt, broken playground equipment, and residents who had learned to mind their own damn business. Perfect. Absolutely perfect for what I had planned. I set up across the street, a clear view of Herman's ground floor apartment. Within 2 hours, I had my answers. Herman wasn't just a gambler, he was dealing drugs. Small time, sure, but enough to bring serious legal trouble down on him. Then there was the parade of visitors, a young woman who stayed precisely 30 minutes, a nervous man constantly glancing over his shoulder, and, most damning of all, 2 men in expensive suits. The kind of guys who collected debts, if you know what I mean. But the real intelligence, the stuff that turned my stomach, came when I hacked into Herman's phone. A little trick I learned in Intel school. The text messages, they painted a sickening picture. Herman had been planning this humiliation for months. He'd been grooming Marissa, whispering in her ear that I was just a grease monkey, that she deserved better. Even worse were the photos. Pictures of Wesley, crying, with captions like, training the boy to be a real man. And then, the final, blood-boiling piece of the puzzle. Herman wasn't just abusing my nephew, he was recording it. For weeks. Building a collection to send to other sick individuals online. My son wasn't just a victim. He was being exploited for an audience of predators. I sat in my rental car as darkness fell, watching Herman's apartment. The old Jake, the mechanic Marissa thought she'd married, he would have called the police. Maybe confronted Herman directly. Tried to work within the system. But Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, had a very different plan. I was going to dismantle Herman Newman, piece by agonizing piece, starting with his mind and working all the way down to his bones. At 11 p.m., I made my move. I'd studied the building's layout, memorized Herman's routine, identified every security camera blind spot. Getting into that apartment was child's play. I'd infiltrated enemy strongholds in 3 different countries. Herman was passed out on his couch, a halo of empty beer bottles around him. I didn't wake him immediately. Instead, I explored, gathering more evidence, understanding his pathetic life. His computer was password protected, of course, but I cracked it in minutes. What I found, it made me physically sick. Dozens of videos of Wesley. Communications with other predators. A chilling, detailed plan to break the boy properly if my deployment lasted longer. When Herman finally stirred, I was sitting in a chair directly across from him, perfectly still in the darkness. He blinked, trying to focus. "Who the hell?" he mumbled. Then his eyes adjusted. He saw my face. "Jesus Christ, Jake," he stammered, scrambling to sit up. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Herman," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." Herman tried to stand, but I didn't move. There was something in my stillness, I think, that was more terrifying than any direct threat. "Look, Jake, I can explain," he started, his voice a frantic mumble. "Sit down, Herman." The command was quiet, almost a whisper, but it sliced through the room. Herman dropped back onto the couch instantly. My voice, I knew, carried an authority he'd never heard before. This wasn't the awkward young man who'd married into his family. "I saw the video you sent me," I continued, my voice unnervingly conversational. "You, and Marissa certainly, had quite the performance planned out. It wasn't you were just what?" I cut him off, a tremor of pure, suppressed rage in my tone. "Beating my 6-year-old son while my wife filmed it for my entertainment." I leaned forward slightly, just enough to make him flinch. "Tell me, Herman, what exactly did you think would happen when I came home?" Herman's mouth went dry. He looked at my eyes, and I could tell he saw it. The emptiness. The predatory gleam. "I thought you were just a mechanic," he whispered.
"Oh, yes.
I heard that part." My smile didn't reach my eyes. It's fascinating how people make assumptions, isn't it? I stood up slowly, and Herman pressed himself further into the couch cushions, as if trying to disappear. "Do you know what I actually do in the army, Herman?" You fix trucks?" I smiled again. "I break people, Herman. Not their bones, mind you, though I could do that, too. I break their minds. I take enemy combatants, men who would gladly die before betraying their cause, and I turn them into sobbing children who tell me everything I want to know." Herman tried to swallow, but his throat was bone dry. "And the beautiful thing about my job," I continued, is that I've become very, very good at it. So good. In fact, that my commanding officers give me the cases they can't solve through conventional means. I walked to Herman's computer and turned the screen towards him. His face went chalk white as he saw his own files displayed. All the videos, all the communications with other predators, everything. Here's what's going to happen, Herman, I said, my voice dropping back to that dangerous whisper. You're going to tell me exactly how long you've been planning this with my wife. You're going to tell me about every single time you've hurt my son. And you're going to tell me what Marissa knew and when she knew it. Jake, I can't. Oh, but you can. I leaned in close, my eyes locked on his. Because the alternative is this. I make one phone call. To Detective Larry Knight at the county sheriff's office. We served together in Iraq. And suddenly, your computer gets anonymously tipped to the FBI. How long? I asked, letting the silence hang heavy. Do you think a man like you lasts in federal prison, Herman? His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. You don't understand. Marissa, she wanted this. She said you were weak, that Wesley needed a stronger male figure. Something cold, something venomous, settled deep in my chest. Continue. We've been together for 2 years, Jake. Since your last deployment. She said you weren't man enough for her. That you were just some nobody who pretended to be a soldier. The room was silent, thick with a horror that was all mine. Then I spoke again, my voice eerily calm. 2 years. And my son, she said he needed discipline. Real discipline. Said I was too soft on him. I processed this information with the same clinical detachment I used when interrogating high-value targets. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd actively participated in my son's abuse for 2 years. 2 years. She'd chosen Herman over her own child's safety. Where is Marissa now? I asked. At your house. She's waiting for me to come over after you get back tomorrow. Interesting, I mused. She doesn't know I'm here early. Herman nodded miserably. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dingy parking lot. You know, Herman, I said, my voice barely audible. In my line of work, we have a saying, the best revenge is the kind your enemy designs for themselves. You and Marissa. I turned back to him, and the look in my eyes made him recoil. You've both been so helpful in that regard. What do you mean? He stammered. You're going to help me give my wife exactly what she deserves, I told him, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. And Herman, by the time I'm done with both of you, you're going to wish I really was just a mechanic. I left Herman's apartment at 3 a.m., a detailed confession recorded on my phone. Herman was a broken man, so terrified he'd do anything I asked. But I wasn't done. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal, every dark corner, before I could design my perfect revenge. My next stop was a surprise visit to Mrs. Celeste Richardson, an elderly widow who lived across the street from my house. She'd always been fond of Wesley, and I'd helped her with yard work before my deployments. I knew she kept close tabs on the neighborhood. Jake, my goodness, you're home early, Celeste exclaimed, answering her door at 6 a.m. She was already dressed, coffee brewing. An early riser, just as I remembered. Emergency leave, Mrs. Richardson. Family situation, I explained. I was hoping you might help me understand what's been going on while I was away. Celeste's expression darkened. Oh, honey, I was wondering when someone was going to ask. She waved me in, pouring me a cup of coffee. Come in, sit down. Over the next hour, my nightmare grew even worse. Celeste had seen Herman's truck in my driveway at least 3 nights a week. She'd heard Wesley crying through the windows more times than she could count. But the most damning evidence? She'd seen Marissa and Herman together at the grocery store, acting like a couple, while Wesley walked behind them, sometimes with visible bruises. I called Child Protective Services twice, Celeste admitted, tears in her eyes. But Marissa always cleaned Wesley up before they came by, and that poor boy was so scared he wouldn't tell anyone what was happening. Why didn't you call me? I asked, my voice tight. I tried, dear. I called the number you left, but Marissa said you were on a classified mission and couldn't be contacted. She said she'd pass along my concerns. My jaw clenched. Marissa hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been actively intercepting communication, isolating me from anyone who might have warned me. Mrs. Richardson, I said, looking her squarely in the eyes. I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do might get very complicated. You might see things that seem concerning, but I need you to trust that I am handling this situation. Celeste studied my face. She'd been married to a Vietnam veteran for 40 years before he passed. She recognized the look of a soldier preparing for war. That boy is lucky to have you as a father, she said simply. You do what you need to do. My final stop before confronting Marissa was the bank. I needed to understand our financial situation, what assets she might have access to. What I discovered made me smile grimly. Marissa hadn't just been draining our joint savings account, transferring money to an account solely in her name. She'd also opened a credit card in my name and maxed it out on purchases that clearly weren't for household necessities. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally, she was stealing from me, systematically preparing to leave me financially ruined. By 10 a.m., I was parked outside my own house, watching through the windows. Wesley was at school. Marissa was alone. She was on the phone, laughing about something, gesturing animatedly. I activated the audio surveillance app I'd installed on her phone months ago, a precaution I'd learned to take with all family members of deployed soldiers. Can't wait until he gets back tomorrow, Marissa was saying, her voice sickeningly sweet. Herman, you should see his face when he watches that video. He's going to be so broken. Then Herman's voice crackled through the speaker. What if he tries to fight me, baby? Marissa giggled. Baby, you could take Jake with one hand tied behind her back. He's never been in a real fight in his life. The army just has him changing oil filters and rotating tires. I turned off the recording, sat back in my car. They thought tomorrow's homecoming was going to be their victory celebration. They had no idea I'd been home for hours. No idea I'd already dismantled Herman's pathetic life. No idea I was about to introduce them both to the real Jake Walker. I checked my watch. Wesley would be home from school in 6 hours. I needed to have the first phase of my operation completed by then. I refused to expose my son to any more trauma. I walked up to my own front door and used my key. Marissa was in the kitchen, her back to me, still on the phone with Herman. I'm telling you, she was saying, he'll probably cry when he sees what we... She turned around, and she screamed. I was standing there in the doorway, still in my military fatigues, duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I looked exactly like the husband returning from deployment, except for my eyes. They held a coldness that made her drop her phone. Hello, honey, I said quietly. I'm home. Marissa's face cycled through a rapid, sickening display of emotions, shock, then fear, then a flicker of guilt, quickly followed by a desperate attempt at normalcy. Jake, oh my God, you scared me, she stammered, rushing towards me, arms outstretched for a hug. I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow. I caught her wrists before she could embrace me, my grip firm. Surprise. She tried to force a smile, but something in my hold, in my tone, made her nervous. How long have you been home? She whispered. Long enough. I released her wrists and walked into my own living room, looking around like I was seeing it for the first time. Nice setup you have here. Very comfortable. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, truly looked at her. New clothes, expensive ones. Hair professionally styled. Nails perfectly manicured. All paid for with money she'd stolen from our joint account. I mean, I said, this whole arrangement you and Herman have worked out. Very cozy. Her face went bone white. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and played the video Herman had sent me. She watched herself mock me, my son being abused, and with each passing second, she seemed to visibly shrink. When the video ended, I asked, my voice dangerously soft, Want to try that again? Marissa's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. Jake, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. But first, let me explain something to you. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I bought when we first moved in, back when I foolishly thought we were building a life together. You see, Marissa, you made a critical error in judgment. What error? You assumed you knew who I was, what I was capable of. My voice remained conversational, almost friendly. It's a common mistake, really. People see what they want to see. Marissa instinctively backed toward the kitchen, but I made no move to follow. My stillness, I could tell, was more threatening than any shout. You thought I was weak, I continued. A mechanic? Someone who cleans tires for real soldiers? Someone who couldn't protect his own family. Jake, please. But here's the thing about assumptions, Marissa. I leaned forward slightly. They can be very dangerous when you're wrong. I stared at her, letting the weight of my words sink in. Do you know what I actually do in the army? She shook her head, tears finally starting to form in her eyes. I break people, Marissa. It's my specialty. I take the strongest, most committed enemies of our country, and I turn them into sobbing, broken shells who tell me everything I want to know. And I do it without leaving a mark. Just then, the kitchen phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. Perfect timing. That would be Herman, I stated, knowing it would terrify her. He's probably wondering why you screamed and then went silent. I pointed to the phone. Answer it. Jake, I can't. My command, laced with an authority that left no room for argument, made Marissa move before she consciously decided to. She picked up the phone, her hands shaking violently. Hello? Marissa? What happened? I heard you scream, and then the line went dead. Herman's frantic voice was audible even from where I sat. I walked over to my wife and held out my hand for the phone. She looked at me pleadingly, but the expression on my face left no room for discussion. She handed me the receiver. Hello, Herman. Dead silence on the other end. I think you and I need to have another conversation. Why don't you come over? Marissa and I were just discussing your relationship. Jake, I don't think. My voice dropped to a whisper, a tone that somehow carried more menace than a shout. You have 10 minutes to get here, Herman. Or I start making phone calls. To the police. To your landlord. To the people you owe money to. Your choice. The line went dead. I hung up the phone and turned back to Marissa, who was now openly sobbing. Now, I said, my voice devoid of warmth, while we wait for Herman, why don't you tell me about the money you've been stealing from our account? Herman arrived in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. That told me everything I needed to know about how utterly terrified he was. I watched through the window as he sat in his truck for a full minute, trying to gather what little courage he had left before finally walking to the door. I opened it before he could even knock. Right on time, Herman, I said, stepping aside. Come in. Marissa was just about to explain how long you two have been planning this. He walked into my house like a man walking to his own execution. Marissa was on the couch, tissues in hand, makeup smeared from crying. Sit down, Herman, I instructed, gesturing to the chair directly across from her. We're having a family meeting. He sat, his eyes darting wildly between Marissa and me. I remained standing, positioned so I could watch them both. Now, I began, my voice calm, deliberate. I've heard Herman's version of events. About how this started 2 years ago. About how you, Marissa, decided our son needed real discipline. About how you've been systematically stealing money from our account, planning to leave me financially destroyed. But I paused, letting my gaze sweep over them. I want to hear it from you. Marissa looked at Herman, who avoided her eyes completely. Jake, you have to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted, my voice sharpening. You thought you'd married a weak man who would never fight back. You thought you could humiliate me, abuse my son, steal my money, and I'd just take it. Because I was too pathetic to stop you. I took a step closer. That was your critical mistake. I walked to the mantel, where I kept my military commendations. Awards Marissa had never bothered to truly look at, let alone read. You never actually looked at who you married, I said, picking up a framed certificate. Purple Heart, I stated, holding it up. for wounds received in enemy action in Afghanistan. I set it down and picked up another. Bronze Star, with Valor Device, for heroic achievement in ground combat against an armed enemy. Herman was staring at them, his eyes wide, like he'd never seen them before. I picked up a third frame. This one's my favorite, I murmured. Army Commendation Medal for my work in intelligence operations. Specifically, for developing new interrogation techniques that were adopted service-wide. Marissa's face had gone utterly white. You see, Herman, when you called me a weakling who cleans tires, you were insulting a man who has personally interrogated over 200 enemy combatants. A man who specializes in psychological warfare. A man who can destroy lives without ever throwing a punch. I sat down directly across from them both. And now, I finished, my gaze unwavering. You've both given me a reason to use those skills on you. What do you want? Herman asked, his voice barely a whisper. I smiled. The same cold, predatory smile I used on enemy prisoners. I want justice. And, unfortunately for both of you, you're going to help me get it. My words were simple, stark. You're both going to confess everything. The abuse. The affair. The financial theft. All of it. You're going to do it on camera with full detail. And you're going to sign written statements. And if we don't? Marissa dared to ask. I pulled out my phone and showed them a video. It was Herman's apartment building, with a clear timestamp from earlier that morning. This, I explained, is federal agents executing a search warrant on Herman's apartment. They're going to find some very interesting things on his computer. Herman went pale, a sickening shade of green. You didn't? Oh, but I did. My voice was soft, laced with grim satisfaction. You see, Herman, when you make enemies with someone in intelligence operations, you don't get to keep secrets. I turned to Marissa. And as for you, darling wife, I've already frozen our joint accounts and filed fraud reports on the credit card you opened in my name. The bank is very interested in talking to you. They both stared at me in horror, their world visibly crumbling. But here's the beautiful part, I continued, leaning forward. If you cooperate fully, confess everything, sign the documents, and do exactly what I tell you, I might be persuaded to show mercy. What kind of mercy? Marissa asked desperately, a flicker of hope in her eyes. My smile widened, chilling her to the bone. The kind where you get to discover exactly how creative a professional interrogator can be when someone hurts a child. 3 hours later, I had it all. Detailed written confessions from both Herman and Marissa, along with video recordings of them admitting to everything. Herman had confessed to 2 years of systematic child abuse, to creating and distributing illicit content featuring Wesley, to planning to escalate the abuse. Marissa had admitted to the affair, the financial theft, and her active participation in both my humiliation and our son's abuse. But I wasn't finished. The confessions were just the beginning. Now comes the interesting part, I told them, reviewing the documents with a detached air. You see, I could turn these over to the authorities right now. Herman would be looking at federal charges for the content on his computer, plus child abuse charges. Marissa would face fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges. Please, Jake. Marissa sobbed, her voice hoarse. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Oh, you're definitely going to disappear, Marissa, I said, walking to the window. Wesley's school bus would arrive in 30 minutes. But not the way you think. Here's what's going to happen. I turned to Herman first. You're going to pack your things and leave town. Tonight. You're going to drive to Miami, check into a specific hotel, and wait for my instructions. What instructions? He stammered. The kind that keep you out of federal prison, Herman. My voice was chillingly calm. You see, I have friends in very interesting places. Some work in law enforcement. Others work in less official capacities. The choice of which friends I introduce you to depends entirely on how well you follow directions. Herman nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. Then I turned to Marissa. And as for you, my dear wife, you're going to pack Wesley's things and yours. Just the essentials. Then you're going to take him to your sister's house in Charlotte. Why? Because what happens next isn't something a child should witness. My voice carried a finality that made both of them shiver. You're going to tell your sister that we're getting divorced, that you made some mistakes, and that you need a place to stay while the lawyers sort things out. Jake, please, Marissa begged, tears streaming. We can work this out. My voice cut through her pleading like a blade. There is no working this out. There is no reconciliation. There is no forgiveness. You chose to hurt my child and humiliate me. Now you get to live with the consequences. She tried one more time. What about Wesley? He needs his mother. I walked over to her, close enough that she could see the cold fury burning in my eyes. Wesley needs to be protected from his mother. The woman who allowed her lover to abuse him for 2 years. The woman who filmed his humiliation for her own amusement. I love my son. No, I hissed, you don't. If you loved him, you would have protected him. Instead, you sacrificed him for your own gratification. I stepped back. Pack his things. Now. He's never coming back to this house while you're in it. Just as I finished speaking, the school bus pulled up outside. Marissa was packing Wesley's clothes. With shaking hands, I watched my son get off the bus, backpack over his shoulders, walking slowly toward the house like a boy who is afraid of what waited for him at home. I met him at the door. Daddy. Wesley's face lit up with a pure joy and relief I hadn't seen in months. You're home early. I knelt down and hugged him, really hugged him for the first time in what felt like forever. I could feel how thin he'd gotten. Saw the faint bruises that makeup couldn't completely hide. Hey, buddy, I missed you so much, I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. Are you staying home now? He asked, his voice small, hopeful. Please say you're staying home. I'm staying home, Wesley. I pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. And we're going to take a trip to see Aunt January. Would you like that? Wesley nodded eagerly. Will Uncle Herman be there? Something cold and vicious settled in my chest. No, buddy. Uncle Herman won't be bothering us anymore. As I helped Wesley pack his favorite toys, I made a silent promise. Herman and Marissa had thought they were destroying a weak man who wouldn't fight back. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A father who would stop at nothing to protect his child, and a soldier trained to destroy his enemies with methodical precision. The real reckoning was just beginning. After Wesley and Marissa left for Charlotte, I followed at a distance just to make sure they actually went there. I returned to my quiet house. Phase 2 of my operation began. I had 48 hours before anyone would expect to hear from me, and I intended to use every single minute. My first call was to Detective Larry Knight, an old Army buddy who now worked with the county sheriff's department. Jake Walker? I heard you were still overseas. What's going on, man? Larry's voice was full of surprise. Larry, I need a favor. I began, my tone serious. Hypothetically speaking, if someone had undeniable evidence of systematic child abuse and financial fraud, but wanted to handle things privately before involving law enforcement, how would you recommend they proceed? There was a long pause. Larry had known me for 10 years. We'd served 2 tours together in Iraq. He knew my voice. Jake, is everything okay? Define okay, Larry. Jesus Christ, how bad is it? I told him everything. The video, the confessions, all the evidence I'd gathered. When I finished, Larry was quiet for a long moment. Jake, normally I tell you to bring this evidence in immediately. But, given what these people did to your boy, another pause. How much time do you need? 72 hours. You've got it, he said, his voice grim. But Jake, whatever you're planning, make sure you can live with it. Oh, I can definitely live with it, Larry. The question is whether they can. My second call was to my old unit commander, Colonel Blake Turner. Walker, you just left 24 hours ago. Please tell me you're not calling to extend your leave. Blake sounded exasperated. Actually, sir, I'm calling to request a transfer. Stateside assignment. My family situation has become complicated. Blake was quiet for a moment. How complicated? I gave him a carefully sanitized version of events. When I finished, Blake's voice had turned ice cold. Jake, you know I have connections at the CIA. I could have investigators on this within hours. I appreciate that, sir. But I prefer to handle this through civilian channels for now. Understood, he said, his voice flat. Consider your transfer approved. And Jake, if you need any resources for handling your family situation, you know how to reach me. The third call was the most important. I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago, but never thought I'd use. Rodriguez's investigation services. Jimmy? It's Jake Walker. Jimmy Rodriguez had been my partner in intelligence operations for 3 years before he left the Army to start his own private investigation firm, specializing in discrete problem resolution for military families and government contractors. Jake, man, I thought you were still downrange. What's going on? I explained the situation. Jimmy listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Jesus, Jake, he finally said, his voice tight. These people really picked the wrong family to mess with. He paused. What do you need? Everything. Full backgrounds on both targets. Financial records, employment history, criminal history, family connections, debts, secrets. I want to know every single pressure point they have. How deep do you want me to go? All the way down. And Jimmy? I need it fast. Give me 12 hours. I'll have a complete dossier on both of them. My final call was to Marissa's sister, Jan Kellogg, in Charlotte. Jake. Marissa just got here with Wesley. She said you two are having some problems. Jan, I need you to keep Wesley with you for a while. Things are complicated right now. Of course. But Jake, Marissa seems really upset. She's not telling me much, just that you found out about some mistakes she made. That's a generous way to put it, January. My voice dropped, becoming serious. I need you to understand something. Wesley has been hurt, badly. I'm handling the situation, but he needs to be somewhere safe while I do. Jan's voice became serious too. Hurt? How? I can't get into details over the phone, I told her. But Jan, don't let Marissa take him anywhere without calling me first. And if she tries to leave with him, call the police immediately. Jake, you're scaring me. Good. Being scared will keep Wesley safe. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet house and reviewed my situation. Herman was driving to Miami, terrified and completely under my control. Marissa was in Charlotte, isolated from her support network, now under surveillance by her own sister. And Wesley? He was safe and protected. Now came the fun part. I opened my laptop and began researching. By morning, I would know everything about Herman and Marissa's lives. Their fears, their weaknesses, their deepest pressure points. And then I would begin systematically dismantling everything they cared about. They had made the mistake of thinking Jake Walker was weak. I was about to show them what strength actually looked like. 72 hours later, I had orchestrated the complete destruction of both Herman Newman and Marissa Walker. No punches thrown. Not a single law broken by me. Jimmy Rodriguez had delivered intelligence beyond my wildest expectations. Herman, it turned out, owed $43,000 to a loan shark named Ricardo Hobbs, a man known for creative debt collection methods. Marissa? Not one affair, but 3. Herman was just the most recent. And more importantly, she'd been stealing money not just from me, but from her previous workplace, building a pattern of financial fraud that stretched back years. My revenge was surgical, precise. For Herman, I simply expedited the natural consequences of his choices. A single anonymous phone call to Ricardo Hobbs, informing him that Herman had been bragging about having money to pay his debts, but was hiding it in a Miami hotel, that resolved the Herman problem permanently. The last I heard, Herman had checked himself into protective custody with the Miami police, practically begging for protection from unknown assailants. The federal charges for the child abuse content found on his computer would ensure he never threatened another child. But more importantly, Ricardo's people would ensure Herman spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never knowing when his past would finally catch up with him. For Marissa, my revenge was more complex, more insidious. I systematically contacted every person in her life. Her employers, her friends, her family, and I provided them with undeniable evidence of her true character. Not accusations. Not hearsay. Documented proof. The video of her mocking me while her son was abused. Bank records clearly showing her theft. Communications with multiple affair partners. Marissa's carefully constructed image as a devoted military wife and loving mother crumbled within 48 hours. Her employer fired her for theft. Her friends abandoned her. Even her own family, after seeing the evidence of how she treated Wesley, turned their backs on her. But my masterpiece, the final act, was the custody hearing. I filed for emergency custody of Wesley, backed by the mountain of evidence. The video, the written confessions, medical records documenting Wesley's injuries, testimony from Mrs. Richardson and other neighbors. Marissa's lawyer, a public defender, since all her stolen money had been frozen by the courts, had no defense. The judge took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to grant me full custody and issue a restraining order prohibiting Marissa from contacting Wesley without supervised visitation. I stood in that courtroom, watching Marissa cry as her lawyer explained she'd be lucky to see her son once a month and only under court supervision. She looked across the courtroom at me, searching my face for any sign of the man she thought she'd married. The weak, forgiving fool who would take her back if she just apologized enough. Instead, she saw Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, looking at her with the same clinical detachment I'd shown enemy combatants. There was no anger in my expression, no satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission completed. "Jake," she mouthed across the courtroom, a desperate plea. "Please." I turned away without acknowledging her. 3 months later, I was sitting on my porch, watching Wesley play in the backyard. The boy was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since I'd come home. The bruises had faded. The nightmares were becoming less frequent. Wesley was finally beginning to believe that he was safe. Mrs. Richardson walked over from her yard, a glass of lemonade in hand. "That boy is lucky to have you," she said, settling into the chair next to me. "I'm the lucky one," I replied, watching Wesley climb his swing set. The same swing set where Herman had once forced him to apologize for disrespecting him. Now Wesley climbed it fearlessly, knowing his father was watching, knowing he was protected. "Have you heard from Marissa?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Last I heard, she was living in her car in Raleigh. Seems she's having trouble finding anyone willing to help her out." "And Herman? Still in protective custody in Miami?" I said, a faint smirk playing on my lips. "Apparently, he's developed a very serious phobia about being alone." Mrs. Richardson studied my profile. "Do you ever regret it? What you did to them?" I watched Wesley, high up on the swing set, pumping his legs. "Mrs. Richardson, I spent years in enemy territory hunting down people who hurt innocent civilians. I never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family." I turned to look at her. "But regret destroying the people who abused my son?" "Not for a second." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Colonel Turner. "Jake, how's civilian life treating you?" I typed back, "Better than expected, sir. Turns out, some missions are worth coming home for." As the sun set over my backyard, Jake Walker, former Special Forces interrogator, current single father and permanently reformed believer in the power of underestimating the quiet ones, watched my son play. And I made myself a promise. Wesley would never have to be afraid again. And anyone who tried to hurt him would discover what Herman and Marissa had learned too late. The most dangerous enemy is the one you mistake for prey. Some people, I'd learned, confused quiet strength with weakness. Those people discovered their mistake exactly once. I had spent my career protecting innocent people from monsters. I just never expected to find the worst monsters in my own home. But I'd handled them the same way I'd handled every other threat to innocent life, with methodical precision, overwhelming force, and absolutely no mercy. "Daddy, watch me go really high," Wesley called out from the swing set. I smiled. A real smile. Warm and genuine. Nothing like the cold expression my enemies had learned to fear. "I'm watching, buddy," I called back. "I'm always watching." And in a house across town, where Marissa was spending another night alone, wondering how the weak man she'd married had destroyed her entire life so completely, those words, if she could hear them, would have sent a chilling down her spine. Because Jake Walker was always watching, always protecting, and never, ever forgiving those who threatened his family. The quiet ones, as Herman and Marissa had learned too late, were indeed the most dangerous of all.
Phew.
That's my story. It's been a journey. Thinking back, what would you have done in my shoes? How far would you go to protect your family from that kind of betrayal? I really want to hear your thoughts on this one. Drop a comment below, I'll be reading.